Welcome to the first episode of Troy Residents for Responsible Growth podcast. My name is Derrick Ramert of Troy Residents for Responsible Growth, and with me are two other of the Troy Residents group, and thankfully people that are much smarter than me. Mr. Justin, Mr. Matt, would you two like to introduce yourselves?
Well, hi, I'm Justin Mattea, a resident of Troy.
And I'm Matthew Marshall. I'm the tech director at Bethel Church in Troy.
And we can't let Matt get by without bragging about his official title. He's our Minister of Technology, our producer of this podcast. And we have a guest today. And with the guest we have today, we may be setting the bar just pretty high right out of the gate. I'm not sure we're going to be able to top this one if we do another podcast, but we have Mr. Prescott Balch from Caledonia, Wisconsin. So Prescott, we appreciate you joining us today.
My pleasure.
So today's conversations is about large-scale data center development and what it means when a proposal like this lands in a small community. And this matters, not just for Troy, but for small towns across the country that are now suddenly have to navigate big decisions. Right now we're hearing about many towns and villages, and they're being approached with large-scale data center proposals, particularly in Illinois and Wisconsin. And today we're talking with someone they've already lived through that. In his town, a major data center project was proposed, and the community had to decide. They had to see, is this the right fit for us? And we saw residents organize. They asked questions. They dug into details, and ultimately that project was withdrawn. And Prescott, you were one of the key people who stepped up. You were digging into the research, organizing neighbors, and helping reframe the conversation around long-term risk, a little bit of a different angle. And now we're seeing that Troy is becoming one of those towns that we're being faced with this decision, trying to navigate through those big decisions, and is this the right fit for us? And just to give you a little background, when we first heard about this here in Troy, it was just a few of us who became aware of it. It was towards the end of November. And what caught our attention was there were some recent ordinances that were being passed related to data centers. And from seeing it in the newspaper, it felt like data centers were being welcomed here. And so we started asking questions. We really didn't know what was going on. We started going to city council meetings, trying to get clearer answers. And we felt there was a little bit of a transparency issue. So we started a Facebook page. What do you do when you don't know what to do? I guess you start a Facebook page. We started a Facebook page, Troy Residents for Responsible Growth. And at the beginning, it was simply about awareness. It was making sure that people understood what was happening. But within a month, we saw that conversations started escalating very quickly. We went from ordinances being passed that we told were to protect us to a site prepping company coming in, and they're talking about 300 acres, a 500 megawatt facility. And for us, and I'm sure you can relate, that's when it became clear that this wasn't abstract, it was real. And if you fast forward to where we're at today, we're having city meetings with PAC city council meetings, PAC zoning and planning meetings. We're being told that this is still in the early stages of the proposal, but this has the potential to fundamentally change the landscape of our community. And when it's something this big shows up, it can feel overwhelming. The numbers are large, the companies are powerful, their messagings are polished. But thankfully, again, as I said earlier, we're not the first town to face this. So Prescott, first off, just thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing what your experience is as you face something similar. And before we go into that, if we could just give the viewers a little context, can you walk through just who you are and what you're doing before any of this started?
Certainly. If you could throw up the About Me slide, because every presentation I do needs a good horse picture. I am a retired technology executive. I had retired in early 2024. And about a year and a half later, in the summer of 2025, a friend of mine saw a sign in the grass about rezoning. Before I get into that story, just the background for me is 38-year career, large corporate software development, financial services. I made a great living on building software. That software ran in large data centers, and I like data centers. I think they're good. We need them. My angle on this is I'm the last person you'd expect to have concerns about building more data centers, but my goal is to help communities figure out whether it's right for them and figure out for the industry really a pattern where these things do make sense. And bottom line, I don't think they make a whole lot of sense in small towns, and I've got a whole bunch of reasons that we'll walk through in this session to try to articulate what some of those concerns are. At the end of the day, I'm trying to level the information playing field with people who maybe don't know the industry, they don't know what the risks are. Let's provide full information to people and to community leaders in order that they can all come to the right decision, not necessarily the one that looks right on paper with too little information. That's what I'm about, and I've been running around certainly my state as well as some neighboring states trying to help communities do just that. Just let's understand risk and reward. They always go hand in hand. They never travel except in pairs, and you have to understand the full picture if you want to make a good decision.
Love a good horse picture. So, and that did when we had looked through some of the materials on you, that did stand out. The I love data centers. I think that probably catches a lot of people off guard to hear that.
I know.
And that,
yeah.
And that's been our messaging. It's not saying we love data centers or dislike them, but when we got up and started talking to towns about this, it was or the city council, we're not anti-technology.
Right.
It's about the fit.
Absolutely. Yep. They're needed components of our infrastructure, but they're also very unique things. We need to understand what they're like so that like I said, the village officials know what they're agreeing to. If they don't ask the right questions, then they may have in their mind something completely different, and then they'll regret the decision after it's built or while it's being built, in fact.
Perfect.
Let's go. Let's just dive in if you want to do it. So my whole thing is, as I said, it's not just data centers. I do like them, and I think we need them. It's data centers in small communities that represent a significant number of risks. There's clearly a reward there. Nobody denies that there's tax revenue, a very large dollar amount tax revenue that's there if the buildings get built and the valuations are as projected or even close. You'll have more tax revenue than you can shake a stick at. And nobody denies that. But like I said, risk and reward travel in pairs at all times. And I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we talked about with our village officials to try to represent that maybe this was not the right balance between risk and reward for small towns. And the first one is sort of a big deal, financial concentration risk. And I mapped out 2 communities here in Wisconsin, but this is no different than any other communities that are small that I've seen. When you take the forecasted financial risk, tax revenue, and then map it against current tax revenue, you see just massive concentration. And if you don't think of this as tax revenue for a city and think of it for a minute as your investment portfolio or your retirement portfolio, you would probably call up your financial advisor and say, are you sure this is okay that I've got this much allocated against one investment? But then if you add to that, the technology industry is volatile. It reinvents itself all the time. It has no reverence for its own past. It casts aside yesterday's technology as soon as the math says to do so. As soon as the cool new thing comes along, and so it's sort of doubly risky. One, you have the concentration risk, but you also happen to have that risk concentrated into a single investment or a single tax revenue source that itself has a history of being very volatile. And if you think about the things that can go wrong financially with this kind of concentration risk, I can't say for sure I know exactly how commercial real estate is valued in your town, but I think it's pretty consistent across the country that it's largely valued on net operating income model. And so if for some reason the industry starts to be able to rent data center space for less money, the owner of the building is going to say, hey, the valuation should drop. Now you're looking at, in the left-hand corner here, a town that's got half its tax revenue coming from someplace. And even if that tax revenue from the valuation dropped 20%, that is a huge hit. And there's no place to go except for the current residents to make up the difference. To throw all your eggs in one basket, all those simple little phrases that we learned as children, don't put all your eggs in one basket. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is, et cetera. Those all are like just leaping off the page at me when I'm looking at my own proposal saying, why would we walk into this kind of risk? in our case, it wasn't quite as bad as these two, but it was still enough for me as a financial services guy and a technology guy to say, that really sounds bad. I don't want to have a tax bill that comes in next year and it says we lost all of that tax revenue from the building because it went empty. And sorry, but you little people have to pick up the tab. Another way to look at it is just sort of like the Midwest is full of single company towns, single industry towns, and that never ends well, whether it's mining or automotive. And those things just sort of happened and towns stumbled into it. Here we are with a lot of towns across the upper Midwest almost willingly walking into this kind of concentration risk, not having learned the lesson that one needs to broaden the tax base, not concentrate it.
That one is interesting because we had and Justin can probably speak to this better than I can, but we had a Q&A with Cloverleaf the other day, and some of our city and county officials were there, including our Madison County assessor. They talked about if the proposed data center will be built here, the fair market value of it being over $1.5 billion. And they were telling us that one, that'd be the largest taxpayer in the county by a significant margin. And then they also talked about how scenarios of how it could lower our property tax. And I think that was they were trying to make that as a big selling point in the beginning of lowering our property tax. So when cities are being shown slides that are lowering their property tax, one, I think this speaks volumes to it, but what assumptions do you think that they're usually making behind that math?
Well, I think in fairness, they're right. If everything goes according to plan, you're going to have you're either going to have more total tax levy to spend and everybody's taxes stay flat, or you're going to have the same tax levy and everybody's taxes drop because you have this new taxpayer in town. And that's fine. That's true. But there's another edge to that sword. And that is you can have something happen to that valuation down the road that all of a sudden now puts a burden back on the regular taxpayers to make up. You could have a 20% increase year over year on, quote, normal taxpayers because the industry said, we're not making as much money on data centers, and so I need my valuation to drop, and you have to drop it. So one of the things I say to communities is there's a human tendency, and it seems exacerbated in the situation, for people to look very narrowly at one point in time and one number on a piece of paper and say, look, it can be $1.5 billion in valuation. It's true. It can be lowering of everybody's taxes. That's true, but it's in a very narrow window. What's the risk getting to that number and what's the risk after you get to that number? This is a slide that says after you get to that number, you have a ton of risks and it can harm taxpayers immensely when you raise taxes on them 20, 30, 40, 50% overnight or year over year. So I don't keep the focus off the one data point and start talking about the timeline risks.
Well, Prescott, maybe I'm hearing this correctly. I want to kind of ask you, it sounds like the city had $10 that they spent each year and they budgeted for that $10. All of a sudden there's a data center comes to town, and so they tell us that now we're going to budget for $20. And that data center all of a sudden, for some reason, no longer is feasible. The town is already committed to spending that $20. So they're going to have to get that $10 from somewhere, and they're going to have to come back to the citizens and say, whoops, we made a mistake. And now you guys are going to have to help pitch in so we can pay for the things we budgeted for.
That's exactly right. 100% right. That's exactly the risk. Unless your city officials have the most perfect financial discipline ever and will for the next 20, 30, 40 years, and they take the money from the data center and they put it in a separate fund and don't spend it, which of course they'll never do. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you get used to the revenue, you enjoy it, you add operating expense, and then the rug gets pulled out from under you later, and you have no choice but to sock it to the current residents. If you just think of it as like portfolio management, it's an irresponsible thing to do. And one thing you will hear a lot in this conversation is this commercial real estate broadens the tax base. It takes the tax base and makes it less about residential real estate and more about commercial real estate. That you look at this picture, that is clearly not the case. These things are so big, they concentrate the financial risk. If you were adding a little bit of commercial real estate, that would be great. That would be broadening the tax base. If you add this much, it is absolutely concentrating the risk, and it's irresponsible.
And it does kind of feel, we're in a little bit of a gold rush where big, gigantic, high emitting tons of money. And so they aren't only building at it. You've got these third party companies like Cloverleaf all over the country rushing to collect that money and build these data centers. And, there just might be too many and they just might fail.
And that's a great segue to the next slide, like a perfect segue. Are we in a bubble? So I've included a quote here from Mark Zuckerberg, which is really telling. If we end up misspending a couple $100 billion, I think that's going to be very unfortunate, obviously. But what I'd say is I actually think the risk is higher on the other side. So yes, we are being irrational. If you look at the bottom graph there's $350 billion is the current size of the data center industry or data center market. Add up all the value of data centers, you get 350. The aggregate value of the proposals is $2.5 trillion. And that's not all in 1 year. It's over the course of the next few years, but still, no industry grows that fast. It's not safe to grow that fast. There are probably more proposals in there than they really need because some of them are getting rejected, but still, doubling, tripling, quadrupling the size of an industry this fast is just irrational. I do, however, believe that there is something rational going on here, which I'll come to in a minute. But before I go there, I want to talk about the hype cycle, which is, I call it the only thing in technology everybody agrees on. And that is every time there's a new super exciting technology, we all get exuberant about it. We think it's going to slice bread and chauffeur our kids to school and just be absolutely everything to everyone. And we overbuild like crazy, whether it's software, hardware, you name it. And we ultimately hit the peak of inflated expectations. And then we realize, wow, that was probably a little bit too zealous. And we come crashing down to the trough of disillusionment. And then we sort of find our legs and figure out what steady state looks like. You can take all of the major shifts in the technology industry over the last 4 decades and map it along this. The only thing that differs is how long each phase lasts and how high the peak and the trough are. But they all fit this same model. The dot-com era or boom and bust was exactly the same as this. Is it happening with AI? Well, sure. I think it is. There's no question about it that we are on the way up that slope. We do not know when we'll get to the peak, and we do not know when we'll drop and how far we'll drop, but it's going to happen because this is always true. What it means to a little town, though, is, well, how are you protected? Do you have an agreement with the developer of the property that if they build only half the project that you're going to be kept whole? Have you built any infrastructure that you're going to be left holding the bag on? Can they walk away from the deal? What if they build 1 out of 10 buildings and you have an underused parcel for the next 30 years? Are you prepared for large valuation reductions? If we have overbuilt and now a data center operator who owns the building is going to say, my revenue just got cut 90%, I'm screwed. You need to bail me out. The last item on here, those as a former software guy, I think is the most likely. So they're all chasing these big data center buildouts because artificial intelligence right now as an operation is really expensive. And because it's new and it hasn't been fine-tuned like, say, Google searching has, which is a very cheap exercise. So they know they need the capacity. If we need to put artificial intelligence in everything, everywhere at scale, they are going to town using that calculation and saying, I need $2.5 trillion worth of data centers. Well, if some software guy comes along or software group, company, whatever comes along and says, we have a solution that makes AI 90% as effective at 5% of the cost, boom, you just lost all your demand for data centers because you can now get the same functionality for a lot less computing power.
Even in like the AI industry, there's been one notable bubble burst kind of already. And that was the advent of DeepSeek R1, which was a open source model made by China that used a new set of philosophies to drastically scale down the complexity needed for AI models. And when that happened, all of the AI companies went scurrying. We're like, wait, quick, how do we duplicate this? How do we make this work in this much more efficient manner.
That's right. And if I can take slide 1 and slide 2 and sort of meld them together, if you look in your own audited financial statements or budget or whatever, you'll find some comments in there that says any money that the township has that is invested has to be invested in super safe instruments. Like you can't go buy penny stocks with village money. It's against the chart. So in that sense, like signing up for this industry at this time with this technology is like betting the village's future finances on a super risky investment. And it is in contradiction with normal investment principles of a municipality. But nobody's looking at it as an investment. So they're looking at it as a zoning thing. Like, sure, go ahead, build it. But what I'm trying to point out is, well, yeah, you actually are investing. You're letting a parcel be used for a certain thing. That's going to generate some revenue. If that revenue is not steady, you have a volatility problem that's going to be very painful for your residents. And the industry is behaving right now in a way that has happened multiple times, and it's going to be a bumpy ride. So should you wait until we get to that plateau of productivity? Yeah, that would be better. If you get in now, you have no idea how bumpy that ride is going to be, and it could be very painful in the next couple of years.
Prescott, I think I heard the city trying to sell part of as we're going to receive a lot of money in utilities taxes, and that's where a lot of. So if a software company came around and could sell to these hyperscalers, you only need to use 25% of the electricity at your data center. I guess that would substantially reduce any revenue that they projected out for 10 or 20 years.
Absolutely. If they, yeah, absolutely.
So do
All
you
right.
think,
Yeah,
just
go ahead.
curious on this one, do you think, you mentioned that the software changed, how it could change the playbook. Do you think towns are even, from what you've seen, are towns even thinking of this
No.
kind of technological uncertainty? Just the
No,
money?
they, like I said, and it's not evil. It's not ill-intentioned at all. It's just human. They see a dollar amount, whether it's utility revenue or tax revenue or whatever. They see that dollar amount, and their natural reaction is thinking, I can snap my fingers and get there, and it will exist in perpetuity. And what we said early on to our community group was we have to show them the timeline risks. And we need to focus because we think they're all trying to do the right thing long term for the village. And largely long term is a financial thing. We need to show them the risks on that timeline and show them how it's actually way too high risk to support taking the tax revenue that they see in that nice glossy photo from the developer. And all of the other ancillary arguments that are sort of commonplace in this debate, I think they're helpful to get people engaged and out in front of the public. But I think the primary message here to a town is you are violating your own conservative principles by getting into this kind of arrangement with a tech company and thinking that is going to be safe and sound over the long haul.
That is interesting, because I don't know what your first pitch was or the first pitch to you from your city was, but for us, the first pitch they did emphasize the tax revenue, the jobs, how this is too good of a deal for us to pass up.
Yeah.
And if they don't jump on it, someone is.
Well, and they're right, and someone is, but if Bernie Madoff calls you and tells you he's got a great deal for you, you're going to hope somebody else takes the deal instead of you. The risk and reward go hand in hand. So the goal here is just identify the risks. And so since you mentioned those risks, let's go to the next slide and talk about the next big one, which is again on the tail end. So technology industry relentlessly innovates, like really no other industry, and has no reverence for its past. If the math says ditch this thing, they'll ditch this thing. There's no data on hyperscale data center lifespan. It doesn't exist because they're brand new. These very big data centers are no more than a couple years old at the oldest. Historically, data centers have had a lifespan of 15 to 25 years, where lifespan is defined as, it still functions, but it cost to upgrade, whether that's adding more compute capacity or changing out the cooling system or whatever, at some point they just become easier to sell to somebody else and to reuse for something else, or um, just sell them all together and whatever. But hyperscale data centers are very purpose built. If you've ever seen one, and, and you may or may not have asked yourself, well, what if the company that owned it didn't want to use it anymore, the company went bankrupt, or the data center industry moved on to some other way to power things and this became too expensive to operate? Any number of things can happen. Maybe low risk but high impact. No one in commercial real estate that I've talked to has been able to articulate any reasonable use of a hyperscale data center. The closest I've gotten is a joke that it would be a very big bowling alley. Maybe you guys need a bowling alley with like 300 lanes in it. But back to the small communities part of this, if you put, say, 3 million square feet of commercial real estate in a tiny little town, it doesn't matter whether it's purpose built or not. You ain't filling it, right? You might have 500,000 square feet of combined space in a small community. Now you have 3 million free square footage available. You're not going to attract 3 million. It's going to be empty for a really long time, just pure scale. But if you add to that it's purpose built and it's hard to reuse it for something, you'll have a lifetime building in your community with no way to deal with it. And I'm not the only person that thought of this risk. Saline Township, Michigan, thought of this protection all by themselves, and I think this was brilliant. They protected themselves by requiring a destruction bond. And I linked it to the bottom if you want to look it up. It's a legal document, so it'll bore you to tears. But right up top, we're worried about this thing being empty. And if you leave it empty for more than 5 years, you're buying a $10 million bond, so we can have the money even if you go bankrupt. And after 5 years of no occupancy, we're ripping it down. That's the sort of risks that people are starting to see by understanding that full timeline risk. And you do not want to be stuck with a 3 million square foot data center campus that has no hope of being reused ever.
Can you, just so people understand why they have limited reuse possibilities, can you go into that briefly?
So they're low ceilings. They have no windows, and they're massive. So you can't use them as a warehouse because the ceilings are too low. Windowless usually is pretty much a deterrent to office building usage. But if you have a low ceilinged, large, high power usage, then it's great. The air conditioning is fantastic too. Like you can cool the thing like nobody's business. I've asked multiple commercial real estate experts in the Wisconsin area, and all of them look at me with a blank stare saying, no, I just don't see much use there. Maybe you could repurpose a little bit of it, like the front part where they have the office space for the 12 people that work in it. But the big long bowling alley part, like no dice. They got nothing. And I'll be fair and say, in one sense, that probably means they'll last a little longer in terms of lifespan because there's no recovery cost. Like they can't sell it and have somebody pay them pennies on the dollar to at least use it as a warehouse. So the math might last a little longer, and maybe instead of 25 years on the outside, you'll get 30 to 35. But you're still in the window of planning for a municipality. If somebody said, I want to build a power plant across the street, but I know that in 35 years it's going to be obsolete, you'd tell them, get out of here. Like, I'm not leaving that eyesore across the street if it's only got a 35-year lifespan. You'd never do that.
And I think you're not really seeing many instances where companies are willing to agree to return them to their pre-construction state. Is that fair?
Yeah, I've actually heard some say that's not a fair thing to ask, but in Saline Township, the developer agreed to it.
Sure, it almost seems like you're obligated to insist upon this, especially now that there's some precedent to
Absolutely. I- If you have a developer that's telling you this is not fair, you point out the risk and say, "I'm sorry, but those are the terms. Like, I'm not leaving this community high and dry with 3 million square feet of building that can't be used for anything else. Have you drop off the keys at City Hall when you leave. I'm not doing
Right.
that to my residents. I'm here to protect them, not to protect the developer."
Right. It's funny. Early on, you'd mentioned, companies or not companies. I'm sorry, towns investing all in either in mining or like car
Hmm.
manufacturing.
Hmm.
Not that there's anything wrong with those. My wife's from a town that was miners. That was her father's profession. Those mines dried up, and that the town is struggling to get that income. I'm from a town where the GM plant closed, and that town's struggling now because again, it was all those eggs in one basket. While that was there, it was great. While the money was there, it was great. But once it was gone, they're struggling to try and recoup, and they're not the towns that they once were.
Absolutely. I just think it's irresponsible to knowingly walk into that kind of risk. That is not the stated reason behind doing commercial development in a town is to broaden the tax base, not concentrate it. Let's jump to the next slide because we're not done talking about risks. Um, Size imbalance. This is huge. I've got a small community here. It's actually on the larger side compared to some of the ones getting these deals. Ours was a 25,000 person village. Um, but like, we've got a small staff. They're used to doing small stuff. And here they are negotiating with a Fortune 50 company on a deal that Fortune 50 company spends more in the first week of the year on legal expenses than we spend all year long. Um, they have they have more lawyers than we will ever have. They have more money than we will ever have. And they know the ins and outs of these deals way better than we ever will. Why any small town would ever think that they are going to come up with a good deal before the deal is signed, why they would ever think they could negotiate well there is beyond me, other than just sort of not knowing what they don't know. But there's a problem on the back end as well. And on the back end, after you've done a deal and they're off to the races, and you add in that financial concentration risk, guess what? You're going to do everything they ask. And as a example of that, literally days after the financing deal was done in Port Washington, Wisconsin with their data center developer, the data center developer showed up at the planning commission meeting and said, we would like you to approve a 24/7 construction schedule. and and they said, okay.
I saw that.
And now they have heavy industrial construction going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for as far as the eye can see. And we can talk a little bit about construction, but it is not benign construction site. It's not like the house that's being built next door to you. It's a massive facility, and just an unimaginable annoyance to any residential areas nearby. So you will essentially be owned. You'll be a company town. There'll be 20, 30, 50% of your revenue, and you'll have to do whatever they want, because the alternative is you say no and end up having to harm your residents because you're not getting the revenue in time, or you're getting less of it, or whatever. You're just going to do what they say. And you even if you didn't like it, you'd have to do it, because all they'd have to do is threaten to sue you, and then you can't even afford to go to court. I used an example here of Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin, that's now home to a projected 17 data centers. After they started their deal in 2017-ish to now, they've quadrupled their operating expense for legal bills. And that's okay, I guess. They're going to get a whole bunch of money, but when they're pitching it to the residents and saying we're going to get whatever, 1.5 million in revenue every year, they're forgetting to decrement all the costs. If your legal expenses go from 100,000 to 500,000 per year to deal with the 1.5 million, well, then you should be telling me I'm going to get 1.1 million instead of 1.5 million. Just be fair. And so our proposal, they said it's all tax revenue and no no cost. And we said, come on, guys, like you're proving you're in over your heads. You're not even accounting for added costs of chasing the tax revenue. And everybody that's ever been in business knows it costs money to make money. And these big giant projects are no exception. In fact, they're probably on the higher end because these big companies just they want to get what they want, and they will take you to court to get it, and you won't be able to fight them.
Yeah, I think earlier I mentioned everything they pitched to us of the money, right? The money that's going to come in, how good this will be from the city. And once we had residents push back, I think that their message softened a little, but even the city officials are stating like, hey, this is new for us. And when it's something that's that new, to your point, they don't probably, by it being new, by given nature of that statement, you don't know what you're doing. And it seems like, to your point, for small towns, that can be especially dangerous.
At 100%. And it's also, I'll warn you and your group, it's also a very delicate line to walk when you're talking to people, because the lion's share of this challenge that you have is not so much finding information and outside experts and so on. It's convincing someone they don't know what they don't know. And you could say, hey, you're dumb. You haven't thought of this. That usually backfires. So don't take that approach. You have to reveal this. It's okay that you don't know what you don't know. Let me tell you what we've helped uncover. Try to understand the risks and give them a way to look at it. Don't look at it like this. Look at it like this on the timeline. Here are all the things that can go wrong. Here's why it's highly volatile, blah, et cetera, et cetera. You have to be very delicate about how you reveal the risk. At the end of the day, though, I strongly believe almost all elected officials want to do the right thing.
Yes.
And right thing means the right thing long term, largely financially for the village, because that's really their charge. Like we want to not let this place go belly up or jack up your taxes from one year to the next. And if you can convince them that this is not the right thing, the right thing financially, you have a chance at convincing them that the risks outweigh the rewards. That was our experience. It worked for us. It's worked now in a few other locations here in Wisconsin. Don't stop talking about all the other things. Like the vision for the town, the open space, do we want to make this a good place to live or a good place to develop, that kind of thing. Like keep on those themes because they're all really important. But I believe, and it worked for us, like the focus is the financial argument because there are so many risks. People just don't understand because one, they don't know the technology industry, and two, they don't understand the risks of dealing with a large corporation.
And I think, to your point, I think our town does have. I think they saw the bright, shiny golden egg, right? But we're small town.
Yeah.
Or our brothers. I do think that it's always the best intentions in mind. But these are things that none of us have thought about 4 months ago or 5 months ago. And Justin, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I was thinking about there's a lot of themes like in how the data center company negotiates with the city or deals with the city. You can take it as something as simple as playing the game of Monopoly. You sit down at a table with three people who've been playing for 10 years and know all the rules and know how to play. And it's your first how to strategically handle each moment as you go around the board. What's the best thing to do on a piece? What to do next, So it's really hard when you're dealing with people who are strategically knowledgeable, have been through this before and just know how they want the end product to be, and you don't know.
That's right. Absolutely. All right, let's go to the last slide. There are an awful lot of myths about benefits. I heard you mention some of them. The first one is actually a truth. Construction jobs will be plentiful. No uncertain terms. You will have an awful lot of construction jobs for the duration of the build. And the build can be long-term. It can be a long-term build. It can be a decade long, which is both a risk and a reward. I'll come back to that in a minute. But you will absolutely have a lot of construction work, and you will have the economic impact, the indirect economic impact that comes with that construction work. You will also have some of the downsides of that. So if you have a rental price problem in your community or general area, that many construction jobs in a small town puts massive upward pressure on rental prices. So if that's, and that in some communities has been a very resonating message. But let's say that's not a problem. Let's move on to permanent jobs. This is actual data, the most favorable data that I can find from Northern Virginia, which is the data center alley, in case you've heard or not heard that phrase before. Northern Virginia has 549 data centers. I wanted to find out what the direct employment was for the jobs in those data centers. And I went and found the most favorable number I could find, which was from the Northern Virginia Economic Development Corp annual report. If there's an entity that's going to tell you the highest number possible, it's going to be the Economic Development Corp that is pushing all the data center proposals. So they have 10,000 and change direct permanent jobs from data centers over 549 data centers. That math is 18 jobs per building. Of those 18 jobs, they didn't break this down, but I know this from my own experience, at least half of them are not high technology jobs. Or maybe saying another way, fewer than half of them are high technology jobs. So yes, you'll have a very small handful of high technology jobs that come in based on the number of buildings that are built, but it's not a lot. It just to be snarky about it, you measure the jobs, you measure the acres per job, not the jobs per acre. It is a very low density employment picture, and you have to ask yourself, is that the best deal that we can get for residents with that parcel? Is there something better that we can do that actually provides some indirect economic benefit to the community? Jobs generate economic activity, always have, always will. Buildings with computers and disk drives in them and a lot of electrical power do not. They don't attract businesses. They don't attract supply chain businesses. They don't attract home construction because there are no people. So whatever myth someone has or belief someone has about jobs with this, they're overstated. Like 18 is the number. I'll round up for 20 to 20 just for fun. There's a phrase in the industry called lights out operation that data centers have been pursuing now for 20 plus years since we solved the problem of remote management of servers. And they'll never get to zero, or if they do, it'll be like 100 years from now. But they are always striving to lower that number. Where the jobs are created is somewhere else. They're going to be in Chicago and Austin and Silicon Valley and India and China and all the people that are using the data centers remotely. That's where the real high tech stuff happened. Data centers are like the broom closet of the industry. You need them because you need a place to put your broom, but nobody visits them. They're pretty boring, and they're just big, giant farms of servers that have no people in them. So disabuse yourselves and your whole community of any notion that they will generate economic activity beyond the construction. On the topic of benign neighbors, I find this to be a universal myth in every community that I've visited. And again, it's that narrow view in this case of like missing the construction that gets you to that dollar amount. Most communities are forgetting the duration, or not forgetting, they're just not realizing that there's anything other than snapping your fingers and having data centers produced. There is a very long, arduous process to get to this, and the construction itself is industrial scale. Building a home is annoying, takes 3 months, whatever, you're done, your neighbors move in, you have a barbecue with them, and everything's great. A data center is a couple of years long as for one building, and they build them usually consecutively. So if somebody's going to build 5, you're looking at a 10-year schedule. If you have schools or homes or hospitals or anything like that anywhere nearby, this is a miserable experience. You pile driving for 4 straight months. The Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin facility, they actually have street sweepers going 10 hours a day around the campus all day, every day because of the amount of dust and debris that's spun up. You just can't imagine how onerous the construction is and how long it lasts. And so what communities are missing is most zoning regulations or ordinances in towns, they have some provision for you can't be too annoying with construction, but it's all based on a relatively short, tolerable construction schedule. And all of the zoning regulations are designed to govern the permanent use of the property. Well, at what point does a 10-year construction process become a use of the property? I tend to think, well, okay, like 6 months of really heavy industrial scale, after 6 months, you sort of have a permanent use, or at least a semi-permanent use, and you need to define a place for it that doesn't lower people's property values, harm their quality of life, put dust and debris in their lungs, etc. And it's the delta between the permanent use and the construction abuse that is what everybody's missing, and nobody's really governing it. And now that we have another pair of active sites here in this state, people are starting to realize it, and there's nothing they can do. The developer is going to sort of do their best, they say, about trying to reduce dust and debris, but you're you're clearing 1,600 acres. You're going to have a lot of dust and debris for a while. I would strongly encourage a focused effort to educate your city officials and your community on just how impactful and invasive the construction is. And if this is anywhere near residences or schools or hospitals, it's almost like a non-starter to me. You just can't do it. And you can't put them next to neighborhoods. Have them visit the Mount Pleasant site or the Port Washington site up here. I'll buy them coffee if they want to come up. I'll take them there myself. You cannot imagine how big and impactful and dusty and dirty these things are, and how much road traffic there is. It would scare you away from putting it anywhere near, say, a school, or a hospital, or residences.
So it's funny, is you mentioned the Mount Pleasant, and on searching on your website, just reading some of your materials.
Mm-hmm.
Use Mount Pleasant, that 1 mile radius, as that example, and circling some of those, just maybe not even neighborhoods, just homes within that area of that. And I think you'd talk to somebody where they said, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. I don't, our ordinances, I don't think they were written to account for any of the construction. I mentioned to you before we started the podcast, I saw you on a Port Washington news piece, and they were talking about that exact piece of that 24/7 construction and just how offensive that dust and that debris is. And it seems like, at least from what I saw in that news piece, that it's kind of tearing that community up, having to deal with that.
It absolutely is. There was another news piece. I think you're referring to a previous one, but the one that was most recent was like 2 days ago. And it was a guy that had a auto repair shop and towing business, and he's losing business because he's having to clean every car he's got like every other day. Like really clean it, like car wash clean it. And they showed a picture of a motorcycle in his shop, and it looks like it's been there for 100 years. It has so much dust on it. Not an exaggeration. And they just wipe the dust off. And so you think about that, and he's like a half a mile from the site, I believe. So if you're downwind from it, you're really in trouble, even if it's probably a mile. And you can't have that near people. It's too invasive. And I don't blame communities for missing this. It's sort of not obvious, but like, let's use the learnings of the places that have fallen into this trap and learn from them and say, because of the duration of the industrial scale of the construction, we need to put these in a place where we would allow industrial development. Permanent use industrial development. It's sort of as simple as that. If it were 3 months, we'd tell them to suck it up and tolerate it. It'll be fine, because after it's built, it's reasonably benign. Maybe there's a little bit of humming and noise and light and that stuff, but it pales in comparison to 24/7 trucks rumbling down your road and 4 months of pile driving and so on. Like, you really have to get a sense for the construction and determine what your schedule is. And I think the zoning is wrong when it doesn't account for that invasiveness of construction. It's just wrong, and it's going to harm people's property values badly and quality of life badly for that duration of construction, which can be a decade long.
I think
Well,
there was a
Prescott,
there's a
I know
go ahead.
I know you. Sorry, Derek. I know you've been watching a lot of projects over in Wisconsin and I guess in the upper Midwest. Have you seen any projects, data center projects, where they were built right next to an existing subdivision?
No. I've heard of a couple in Northern Virginia where they've been relatively close, like maybe a half a mile or so. I don't know much about them, but those are maybe not the hyperscale ones. Maybe those are a little smaller. These hyperscale data centers, every one that I've seen is, yes, they have some residents nearby because they're sort of farming communities, and you're bound to hit at least a couple. But putting nobody's putting these things next to residential areas, and I think largely that's because it's really hard to find big giant parcels of land near residential areas rather than they're thinking about the construction impact. And so if you have this sort of accident happen where you've got a big parcel that's tucked next to a residential area, if you don't think about it, you can really make a big giant mistake.
Let me ask, our ordinance is, now they say that there's special use they can put on top of it, but our ordinance is, they can go up to 200 feet of a residential property line. That was the ordinance that was
Yeah.
proposed.
And
Is
and
that
again,
normal to see that?
yes, it is. It's normal. I think it's too little, but I don't think it's too little because of the use at the back end. That's 200 feet is a problem for the construction because you're literally going to have dump trucks all day, every day for 6 months clearing the property, maybe more than 6 months. You will you will have them like living in a war zone for a really long period of time. Who's going to buy a house when you you point across the street and say, how long is that going to last? And the answer is 8 more years.
Right.
Yeah.
And I what's strange is, well, here in Troy, the initial proposal was to surround 80% of the property of my church. And it was like, we have a school in there too and everything. Like when I first saw the image, I was like, this has to be a joke. And now that, to my understanding, that proposed site is no longer in consideration, which is great. But now they've moved it to right next to a upper middle class neighborhood, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
adjacent.
I think, and I saw this happen as sort of a last gasp to save a proposal that ultimately got withdrawn. But in Howell Township, Michigan, uh, the developer saw, I think, the tide shifting against them. And at the 11th hour, they said, we will buy any house at market rate plus 1% right now if you decide that you won't want to do this deal. They also said if you want to keep your house, we'll backstop you on any property value loss. So get an assessment before the deal. If you then go to sell and your assessment is dropped, we'll cover the difference. So were the terms good enough? I don't know. But it was an olive branch to say, gee, maybe you're right. maybe there is impact here, and maybe even we the developer disagree, but we'll bet that that we're right and it won't drop your property values. Well, fine, put your money where your mouth is. At least they tried. They ended up withdrawing, but I think those are the conversations that your city needs to have with the developer to say, as a city official, I'm here to protect the residents. If that makes it so onerous on the developer that you guys walk away because you don't like the terms of the deal, so be it. I've done no harm to my residents. If I go into this deal and I don't account for these and I have an entire subdivision that loses $100,000 per house or $50,000 per house, I've done an enormous amount of financial damage to my residents, and I should be accountable for that. I should get tossed out. That's how I think the village city officials should be acting as your representative to protect you from the development. If there are benefits there, great, let's get them, but not at the cost of destroying probably the single most important asset that a person has. Like how about if you wreck my car, that's sort of bad, but if you wreck my house, that's really bad.
Right.
have to think through those kinds of impacts and protect the residents at all costs.
So just to set up Troy, we're a town that we really don't have any industrial areas. We're rural towns. It's just less than 11,000 folks. We're a rural town we have a truck stop in one area of the town, but then after that, it's really just small communities. It's farmland. There's not really an area where this could go, especially when you're talking 300 acres. 300 acres is 8% of our town. There's not really an area where it can go where it wouldn't impact to some degree houses, neighborhoods, residents. And that's not to say that data centers don't work everywhere. I mean, you started off the presentation with you love data centers. It doesn't feel like for small towns this is a good fit. This is a good model, at least not for what Troy's offering. But that's not to say they don't work. So where would you say that data centers do work?
Yeah. So I got asked this question early on, and I made sure I had an answer because I don't want to just. I know honestly, I don't want to be the all negatives guy. I'm talking about all the cons because none of the developers are presenting them, so somebody needs to. I've tried to be
Right.
fair about what the positives are, but I have an answer to the question, where do they belong? And there are two answers and then a caveat. The first one is they belong in a place that can absorb the loss of the tax base. So if that's got to be a big enough town with a big enough tax revenue base that if the data center disappears, maybe it's a little painful, but it's not a lot painful. That's a town bigger than 11,000 people. It's a town bigger than 25,000 in our case. It's probably a town like 50, 60,000 on the minimum side. The asterisk that I put on that is the industry has a problem. They've come out with, I need buildings that are this big and campuses that are this big, and big is really giant. And the only place they can find contiguous land of that size is in small towns. And to which I respond, well, that's okay. Like if my living room were the most convenient place for you, you couldn't have it to build your data center. Like, it's an industry problem they have to solve. If your building spec is such that you can't find a place that's right for it, change your building spec. Don't expect the little town to just roll over and say, fine, we'll tolerate 10 years worth of construction in our church. So answer number one is a town big enough to be able to absorb the tax base loss, which creates that size problem. The other thing that I say is I've seen towns around the country that have decided to do a lot of them. So maybe they didn't think they were going to do a lot out of the gate, but they decide, I like the construction benefit. I want to keep my construction workers going for the next 20 years. So we'll just do one after another, and we'll sort of never stop. That also helps them spread out the obsolescence risk because they're building them over the course of 20 years, and if they're going to go obsolete, they'll roll rather than all go obsolete at the same time. So Prineville, Oregon, Boardman, Oregon, Northern Virginia, West Des Moines, Iowa, these are all places that decided, yeah, we kind of like this data center thing. And one of the reasons why initially I led with criticism of my own backyard proposal was the worst case scenario for our village that sort of likes its rural charm and open spaces. The worst case scenario is success. Like you do this and it's great. Everybody loves it. The developer wants to do more. The village wants to do more. And now they're just trying to buy homes up and down and all over. And we've got 20, 30 data centers instead of a nice place to live. So, but I admit there can be some villages, towns, cities that think, times are tough, biggest employer walked out, and it's time to do something rather than nothing, and this is what we got. So let's go in eyes wide open and do it. And if that's what your village wants to do, that's great. But I just think you should be forward and open with the residents and say, this is why we're doing it. And I don't think it sells really well to say, if you lead with, we want to do 30 of these things and we're going to start with the first 5, like people would not be happy about that. But it is possible that scenario happens.
Yeah, and we have some towns around where they've had some factories close, and I guess that could be a possibility. I don't know. Justin, you can probably speak to this better than I can, but Troy we haven't had a population problem. Our towns continue to grow that I know of. We're not financially struggling. Our mayor even said, Detroit's the town that everybody wants to move to. And I would agree with that statement. We have very good schools. a cute, nice little rural town. It's one where if you don't want to feel like you're next to a big city, you come to Troy. It's an amazing town. I love it. So I agree with them that everybody wants to move to Troy, but in the same breath, we're not struggling. We haven't had major industry leave.
So one thing I want to comment on, you said when you first led off that previous stuff, you led with, we don't have a lot of industrial development in Troy. I would immediately ask your elected officials, why is that? Why do we not have, why has Troy not decided to go down the path of industrial development? Because recall, I described the construction as industrial scale development, and it is. And so to the point you just made, we're the nice place to live. We want to stay the nice place to live. Why, if you're choosing not to do industrial development because it doesn't enhance the livability of the town, why would you want to do it with data centers? And what I think is people making those decisions don't realize the industrial scale nature of the construction, and they just think about the permanent use of the building. And that, I think, is a theme to shine a light on and say, well, we don't have industrial development here for a reason, so let's not go down that path.
One public official had said to me, Justin, wouldn't it be great if, we have this $100 million bond or something to build this middle school? Wouldn't it be great to have this revenue to pay down this bond? And if we built the data center, we get all this money. But everybody started to think, but what if no one moved to Troy? After all of a sudden you have a data center, you have all this construction. What good is it to pay down a school bond if people are moving out of town? All of a sudden nobody has an interest. All of a sudden the property values are going down. So, you can't only look at one side of the coin. Money
right.
is good, but what if it's not so good?
Absolutely.
Well, and when they show the pictures of data centers, I think they make them look like nice little office buildings, right? I don't think people even think of the looks of like the utility poles, the power poles that have to power. And again, I understand you're not familiar with Troy, but we really, if you look us up on the internet, I mean, we got an amazing little downtown area. They're revitalizing it so well. It doesn't take much to drive anywhere in Troy, and you're out to nice rural areas or any place you shop at. It's a lot of local businesses where everybody knows everybody. It's a great town, but we're not a town that's filled with all these electrical poles and everything covering it. I don't think people think about what the aesthetics alone.
Yeah, it would be.
I think it's shocking for most people. You see a diagram of what a data center might look like proposed to you by the data center company as they're handing out these sheets as you walk into, but to actually see a video or a photograph of what these construction sites look like, of what the finished products look like, it is massive in scale. It's not what anybody really can fully comprehend until you see a picture or video.
Yeah, and I would actually highly recommend you tell your elected officials, don't go visit a finished data center. You'll get taken to one that's super benign and it's quiet, and you'll think, what's the big deal? We have example after example here of elected officials doing that and coming back and saying, I don't know why everybody's so concerned. Send them to Port Washington. It's a lovely little town and along Lake Michigan. It's a great place, and have them drive the length of the highway that cuts through the area where the data center is, and you will have your opinion changed overnight about what these things are. On their way back, they can take a little detour and go to Mount Pleasant too and see the Microsoft facility. It's just like nothing you've ever seen. I can't tell you how massive these buildings are and how massive the sites are and how much noise and dust and annoyance that they would be for 10 years. It's that 10-year part that is really what separates the thing from anything else that we've ever done or that you guys have ever done in your community. There's just no category for it, and that's what people are missing. If you can get them to make that trip, it would be invaluable.
Well, what's so interesting to me making the trip, we had some officials from our community take a trip to Papillion, Nebraska, and take a tour of a Google site, a completed site, and came back. It was not loud. This is beautiful. There's nothing wrong with that. Well, at the same token, we're receiving, a beer, are being courted by Clover, the data center company, whose crowning achievement is Port Washington. They're the one. Washington made the deals and then sold that project to Vantage. So maybe that would be a better location to go take.
Yeah, Either Port Washington or Mount Pleasant would be fantastic visits. And you don't even need to spend that much time there, just drive around. And it's dystopian. You really would not wish it on your worst enemy. It's too much. And if your site is anywhere near a residential area, hospital, school, church, whatever,
Right.
you would rethink it immediately and say, "Whoa, if that would last for 10 years, we'd never do it."
Yeah. And there's, I said earlier, there's nowhere where you could put it where it doesn't impact some
Yeah,
area
right.
around here. I watched some of the city council meetings online from Port Washington. I heard a lot of people talk about, even people that didn't live there, talked about how they like to come there and visit and just what a beautiful city it was or it is. But then what it's becoming now and how it's tearing everybody apart. And I think that goes back to our fear of, like I said a moment ago, is we are a town you want to live in. And I think when you hear the name Troy, one of the things that instantly pops to mind for people is just how good things like our schools are, how our park is. And all, I don't think that they realize that in that 10 years, a lot can change. People can give up and not want to live here anymore.
Well, I also follow up with Port Washington because I think I read in some of your materials or saw you talk about this. There appears to have been a lot of promises to Port Washington that the data center companies would pay for all this infrastructure and maybe a water treatment plant and all these things. And the community, I guess, thought, well, that's nice. But then they later found out that it wasn't that the data center company was paying for these things. It was more like a loan.
Yeah, it is indeed a loan that's being paid back with tax breaks. There's some nuances there that are specific to the way Wisconsin finances these developments. I'm pretty sure you guys use tax increment financing as well, maybe with slightly different flavor of it. But the topic of tax breaks in general is common across the country in that historically the reason you give somebody a tax break is because they're spurring enough indirect economic benefit to that benefit will create tax revenue that offsets the tax break. So you give somebody $1 million tax break, but you're bringing a whole bunch of people to town and that's creating buildings that are going to generate tax revenue, blah, blah, blah. Somehow over the last, I don't know, several years, we've sort of given up on that promise and just said, come build here. And we don't care if you generate any jobs. And they lie a little bit about the number of jobs anyway, just to make it sound good. But we should not be funding these things with tax breaks at all. And we're giving them massive, in this state and many others, we're giving them massive sales and use tax breaks, which is tens to hundreds of millions of dollars over 20 years per site. And in the case of the 3 active proposals that we have in Wisconsin, they have huge property tax breaks that allow them to pay themselves back for the money that they've fronted for the large infrastructure costs. It's a ripoff of taxpayers. The taxpayers are getting screwed. And again, this is back to the imbalance in the negotiation. I've got this tool called tax increment financing that allows me to sort of pay anything for the development, and the taxpayer is going to get the shaft, but he's not part of the equation to approve the thing. So like, who cares about little old taxpayer? And we've got horrible deals where in Port Washington, it's $455 million in tax breaks for a facility that's going to generate a couple hundred jobs. Like, it's ridiculous. They'll never. And then the sales tax breaks on top of that is, it's probably 600 million total in tax breaks to that one site. It will never repay that, ever. It won't come close. So if I were king for a day, I would strike tax breaks entirely from this unless you are going to commit to a job number and a construction number and whatever that guaranteed that I was going to get some return on that tax break for my residents. So yeah, don't let them do tax breaks.
Well, it just makes me wonder. We're talking about the people who are interested in medicine are about the 5 to 10 most profitable countries or companies in the entire world.
Yeah.
Why are we giving them city, state, and all these kinds of tax breaks for any reason at all? They can afford all these projects. It's just absurd to use it from Cloverleaf.
It absolutely is absurd. And like any investment, you would never guarantee someone money unless they were guaranteeing you a return. And they're not. You're guaranteeing them the tax breaks, and they're not guaranteeing you any of the economic benefits. So how is that ever a good deal? I don't know. Even if they were rich beyond means and could afford it, if they're going to promise you a return on that investment, okay, maybe hold our nose and do it. But we're not even getting that in return. We're just getting, yeah, maybe good things will happen and you'll get a lot of businesses to line up on the interstate to do business in Port Washington. I just don't see it happening. But we're going into it because we're desperate to have somebody build something somewhere, and we're making terrible deals.
Have you seen anywhere in your research of this where there's an actual economic development in the immediate vicinity of these data
No,
centers?
no. There's actually, I call it a reverse halo effect. And I attribute it to two reasons, and this is just a educated guess. So I have pictures of communities and radiuses and like 1 mile radius. And the thought is we build all this infrastructure to get to the site, water, sewer, electricity, and that whether it's a related business or not, it'll attract other businesses along there because the infrastructure's there. Well, 10 years, 15 years longer after these data center constructions, you still have nothing in a radius. I think one of them that I have, maybe it's West Des Moines, Iowa, has a golf course next to it. That's it. Not even a golf course with houses, just a golf course. So one reason I think that reverse halo effect works or anti-halo works is one, it's the construction. Nobody's going to set foot anywhere near these properties until the construction has completely ceased. So do you want to poison all the rest of the land around the site? Probably not. Maybe somebody wants to build a subdivision. Maybe somebody wants to build a office building, whatever. Just know that take a 1 mile radius around the site that you're going to build these data centers on and know that all of that property is going to be untouched for a really long time. I think the second reason why that reverse halo thing works the way it does is because these tech companies are paying a lot of money for this property and it's driving up the price so that normal uses, traditional uses of the property aren't economically viable anymore. And then the people that own that property are sort of holding out for the expansion of the data center campus rather than selling their property at a discount to the rate that their neighbor got for it. Between those two things, I think maybe both of them are contributing, but there is a definite negative impact in the immediate area for economic development. And it's not to be discounted because I don't think people realize that nobody's going to get anywhere near the property with a new development for a decade and a half.
I guess maybe except for another data center.
Well, right. And again, that's maybe what's behind it. Gee, nobody's coming to town and filling up, using our water and sewer extensions. So a new data center will do it because, yeah, these whatever tech company guys are nice to us. We'll let them do another one. And that's where success is your worst case scenario.
A lot of people asked at the Q&A, that 1 mile radius is interesting of property values. Unfortunately, the Cloverleaf, they couldn't give examples of, they're saying they're not seeing examples where they decrease property values. I think they referenced, correct me if I'm wrong, it was DeKalb, Illinois, where a data center is being built, but it's being built in an already industrialized area around it. So by nature of that being there, you've accepted what that is. What have you seen or have you seen anything with property values when this comes into an area that it hasn't been, and now you are looking at that from your back?
Yeah, well, there was a question before, have I seen these placed next to residential areas? And the answer is no, not yet. There are very few homes near Port Washington, near Beaver Dam, and near Mount Pleasant because the parcels that were purchased were either very remote or they bought properties out of the immediate vicinity. So I don't have any data points. I just have the anecdotal, would you buy a house next to an industrial scale construction site that was going to last for 8 to 10 years?
Right.
Probably not. So if anybody wants to deny that, then I challenge them to go buy a house next to an industrial scale development site. It's just obvious. So as soon as somebody builds one next to it, I promise I'll get the data. I just hope nobody does it and gives me the opportunity to do that because you talk to any residential realtor and they'll tell you, yeah, that would be really bad. It would be really hard to move that home at anything but a substantial discount.
Yeah. The jobs claim, we keep getting told, 100, 200 jobs. And what they actually referenced was, if you were to drive by a data center, you don't see 10 cars, you see 100 out there. And it sounds like from what you described, it's these guys building these things consecutively. They're building one, then they build another. So those 100 cars aren't those permanent employees. Would that be a fair guess?
Well, you'll see more than 100 cars if it's being constructed because you'll have like 1,000 construction workers. But after they're built, the numbers are the numbers. Northern Virginia's numbers are 18 per building. So if they have 5 buildings in a campus, that'll be 100 jobs. So maybe you'll see 100 cars. I don't know, but all I have to go on is the actual data from Northern Virginia, and it's limited. And industry experience, lights out operation is the goal. The cool stuff happens on the software side, not the hardware side, and there just aren't a lot of people. There may be some related visits to the building for inspections or maintenance or something from third-party companies that draw some traffic on occasion, but that's going to be fairly limited as well, and sort of small enough for the local community to absorb in terms of jobs.
Well, I was going to say, our town, back to our city officials in our town, I do think, this, like what's happening in a lot of small towns, it seems like it's the golden egg, and I don't think, everybody has to live here. I don't think anybody's chasing anything with ill intentions. I think they're chasing it with the best of intentions. But what would you tell city officials of a small town like us that are hearing data center proposals for the first time?
Well, one, I would tell them you absolutely have to answer the phone when somebody calls offering that kind of money. Like you'd be irresponsible not to entertain the discussion. The second thing I will say is actually this has become a third rail topic. And if you don't handle it right, you risk ripping your community in half no matter what you do, say yes or no. And you don't want to do that. The mistake that I see them making, my own village included, is they have one process for treating a rezoning proposal and a developer agreement, and whether it's a detached garage or a storage facility or whatever, there's one simple little process for a simple little thing. So lesson number one that I've learned is that process does not scale to a data center. And if you don't elongate the process and add steps to communicate with your community and bring them along every step of the way, listen to them, engage them, all you will do is generate distrust and noise and anger and fear, and you'll rip the community apart, and it'll take years to heal whether you've said yes or no. Don't do that. At the end of the day, if your residents don't want something that is absolutely brilliant and lucrative, then don't give it to them. They own the town, so to speak. It's their town. And if there's obvious dissatisfaction there with the proposal, even if you think it's brilliant, I would encourage you not to do it. If you do just think that it's the right thing to do as a city official, then convince everybody. Take your time, convince everyone that it's the right thing to do. Bring them along, educate them on what you see, let them educate you on what they see, and hash it out. You can't do it any other way except in a protracted way if you want to get to the other side without a community that's been fractured.
Well, it kind of seems, for example, in Troy, that Cloverleaf's goal do everything they can as a football Wisconsin to get the ball on the 1 yard line before they might want to defend, their in their city, have a chance to do, and then hurry up, do a quarterback sneak across into the end zone, and then we can't do anything.
Yeah.
Discussed any of this publicly? They didn't say, "Hey, town hall back and do a data center about data centers coming to town. Let's get on Facebook and announce everybody come and let's talk about what this might mean." It was all because Mr. His wife happened to read something about it. Otherwise, nobody would.
Yeah, I'll share with you something that I said in the heat of our run up to a final vote. I shared it with the company that Microsoft had hired to be their sort of development frontman. I said, it's never too late to slow down.
Yeah.
If you're on the 1 yard line, that's fine. We're going to go to halftime. We're going to take a break. It's never too late to slow down. And I said to him straight up, you guys are rolling the dice here. You've got community anger. You've got frustration. You've got like overflowing audiences in village halls. Like, just take a time out now. And you don't have to admit anything went wrong. You just have to say, we want to calm the tenor down and we want to talk about it. Just do that tomorrow. Like, just slow down. There's no reason to hurry. The developer will be happy. The developer does not want to waste all of its efforts to get to wherever they are right now. I guarantee you they don't want to waste that. Throw it away and start over in another community. So they're going to be happy. They will be more than happy to slow down if they are told that's the only way to get past the 1 yard line. It would be the absolute best thing in the world to do. One of the things, as a related topic, tomorrow I'm going to our state capitol and pleading the same argument with the state Senate, to say you need a cooling off period. To your point, village and the developer are getting to the 1 yard line, and then boom, pedal to the metal. 6 weeks later, they voted on it and it's too late to do anything. And the community has no time to respond. Just give me a 4-month pause. Give me 120 days to make my case and tell them all the risks. I'll take the chance. It's just good, healthy debate. Who could be opposed to that? There's no benefit to the community to rush, and the AI bubble and boom will still be there. The demand will still be there for data centers in 4 months. Like, we can chill out. And either you've won them all over or you haven't. And if you haven't, then just, say no.
I think for us, I think we've actually failed to mention this. We're a bit of a unique situation. Backing up on the fear and really what you said was brilliant of what I hope we're going to do. For us, it was, when we did find out, it came very quick. Like I said earlier, all of a sudden we're getting a presentation and it's 300 acres and they're talking about they want this built by 2028. So they would need to start in the second half of 2020 to do that. So right there, you feel like you're up against a clock. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, something that big shows up, it's overwhelming. This proposal is unique and different in that even in the news, they're looking at 3 different sites across 3 different towns, minimum 10 miles away from each other, maximum of 20. And they've even stated this is, even though it's 3 separate locations, it's one project. And so I think that complicates their efforts on if any one town is uncomfortable and we want to hit the pause button. That doesn't just affect one project. That affects 3 different sites for them. I don't know if you've seen examples.
No, I actually have. Ours, a little bit. Ours was a third of 3 data center configuration locally. So if we said no, they were going to have 2 and they needed 3 because they needed a third one that was geographically remote from the first 2. So when we said no, they had to start over and find the third site. And my comment to you guys is that's their problem, not yours. You're going to fundamentally change your town. You should be able to take your time figuring out what the right thing to do is, because you can't go back. You can't restore that land later to its current state. You could tear the building down, I guess, but your town's not going to be the same. So it's not your fault that these things are so big and so impactful. That's the tech company's problem to solve. If they were building 50,000 square foot data centers instead of 400,000 square foot data centers, it'd be a different picture altogether. Kind of their problem that they've decided to make them so big.
No, that's good advice. We're hoping our city hears us on that. I think a lot of people, I mean, it is, and the mayor admitted in one of the city council meetings that this is starting to tear the city apart. And it is, it's giving a lot of people stress of, everybody's worried of, am I going to be the one living next to a data center? And when you drive into Troy, everybody's worried that that's what we're going to be known for. We did a radio interview the other day and the person interviewing us said, well, you have truck stops in that town. And we do. We have them in the north end of town. There's nothing good, bad, and different about them. I think we were probably historically known as a truck stop town. And again, they've gone out of their way to build the community into lots of phenomenal things. And I think for a lot of residents, it's just concern and fear that that's all going to go away.
Yeah, they're right to fear it. And frankly, even if they're not right to fear it, your city elected officials should listen to them and try to allay their concerns. And like I said before, if everybody in town doesn't want something that's really smart, they shouldn't have to be forced to have it. As weird as that sounds, like you should at some point listen to people and do what they want, even if you think it's the wrong thing. In some sense, like 90% of the people saying they don't want it, they are not stupid. They must have some reason to think that. And you should look yourself in the mirror and say, what am I not seeing that they see? Yeah, it's just really tough. It's somewhat bizarre that this has become sort of the third rail. Why not gas stations or Amazon warehouses or something? Why data centers? And I personally think that it's a combination of their size and their absence of any employment.
Yes.
It's like, what's in it for me? All you do is put this big, giant, ugly building that I get to drive past every day, and we get nothing out of it except for tax revenue that you can spend. They don't see the benefits, and they sense that your elected officials can change the nature of the town overnight with one vote and on short notice. And it's disturbing.
I think some of it's too is why did you move to the town, and would you have moved to the town if that was there?
Exactly.
People, it's not saying that, again, there's places that these can belong and go, but then when you choose to live most people who choose to live in towns like ours, you're choosing to live to get away from those things.
Correct. Exactly right. Yep. One of the things we did really early was the proposal that we had kept bragging about Northern Virginia.
Hmm.
I can't remember the name of the county now, but Loudoun County, Virginia. So I went to Loudoun County's webpage and I cut and paste their little brag line, which was something like 150 years ago, even 50 years ago, this place was rural farmland, and now it's a bustling metropolis with lots of restaurants and nightlife and so on. I said, well, there's your answer, guys. Like, if that's what this is going to turn us into, we don't want it. We moved here to get away from that, and we like it here because it's not that. Why on earth would you want to go do that to us? And again, the success is the worst scenario possible, where you just go down this slippery slope. And like down the street from us, we've gone from 2 data centers in Mount Pleasant to 15 because they like it. Well, okay, but you just ruined your town. You're now a data center town and not a good place for people to live. But if that's what you wanted, that's fine. That's not what we want in our town. And we think we define the vision, not you guys.
So this has been, first off, thank you for agreeing to be on the podcast. This has been an amazing download. I think it's just hearing it from someone who's lived through it, because again, at all our meetings on city council, we're all saying, this is new to us. It's not just the council folks up on stage or the mayor or anybody up on stage. It's all of us. And I think when they have toured places, they're asking another city official, what do you think of this? But to actually ask the residents, who are the ones that have to live with the decision, I think that was a misstep to not ask them. I hope if they tour more data centers, they talk to the residents. I'd love for them to go through Port Washington. But I think that's important because, again, that goes back to the heart of their job is to listen to the residents. I think we got great city council folks, so I'm hoping that they do listen to their constituents in the end. So we're optimistic that they will listen to us. But changing a community and changing a fabric like that, ripping it apart, I don't think it's what anybody signed up for. Mr. Prescott, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you being on this call. I've learned a lot. I think we've all learned a lot. My brain's full, and I'm still going to go back and listen to this podcast at least 20 times over until I have it memorized. This has been so very helpful.
It's been my pleasure. I'm happy to help in any way I can, whether that's more of these or talking to your city officials if they'll have me, you name it. I'm just trying to level the information playing field and let people know the pros and the cons and allow them to make wise decisions for their constituents.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure we would love to take you up on that. For background, everybody knows this is Prescott. This is Prescott Balch, and in October of 2025, he effectively stopped a Microsoft data proposal. 244 acres, was it?
240 acres, and it wasn't just me; it was a whole community.
And a whole community,
yes,
of course. Right?
We pushed back. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, you and the community, of course,
yeah.
Pushed back on. But again, your knowledge of it and what you brought to the table really brought an interesting twist for city council folks and for the town to think about. I think that's a lesson that can be a great playbook, not necessarily to stop data centers, but a great playbook to have people think about the best interests of the town and how to keep a town successful going forward. Well, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Anytime.